What happens when the government fines you 100,000 just for calling the president a traitor? What happens when a judge walks into his courtroom thinking his robe protects him from accountability and finds out, too late, that the cameras are already rolling? And what happens when the woman he tries to humiliate doesn't flinch, doesn't fold, but live streams the entire thing to over 1 million Americans? And 7 minutes later, that same judge is the one in handcuffs. This isn't the law. This isn't justice. This is a political ambush caught in real time, and it backfired. Karoline Leavitt, 27 years old, no army behind her, no donor war chest, just a voice, a spine of steel, and a live mic. She walked into a federal courtroom prepared to be silenced and walked out as the face of rebellion. The Biden-appointed judge thought he was making an example out of her. He felt a 6-figure fine would send a message, but he had no idea who was watching. He didn't know Pam Bondi was already circling. He didn't realize the DOJ had already opened a file with his name on it. He fined her at 10:0 man, and by 10:07, the cuffs were on him. This isn't just politics. This is the collision of power, truth, and media. The moment the machine tried to break a woman, and instead ignited a movement. Strap in, because you're not listening to a legal hearing. You're witnessing unfiltered, unhinged, and completely unstoppable history. The system tried to crush a voice, but instead, it created a firestorm. And tonight, that fire goes nationwide. The trigger. You fined me $100K for a sentence. Let's get one thing straight. I didn't throw a chair. I didn't storm the bench. I didn't threaten anyone. I spoke a sentence, just 16 words. 16 words that shook the system to its core. Joe Biden is a traitor who turned America into a haven for crime and illegal immigration. That's it. That's all it took. And for that, Judge John Harrow slammed down his gavel and fined me $100,000. $100,000. Not for violence, not for perjury, but speaking the truth makes elites squirm in their seats. So let's talk about that. We don't fine people for political opinions in the United States of America. We don't silence voices because they rattle the narrative. But today, that's precisely what happened. Not behind closed doors, not in some dark back room. It happened on camera. In public, on the record. You know what my sentence did? It didn't break decorum. It broke their control. Judge Harrow didn't fine me for disrespecting the court. He fined me for disrespecting the script. His script. The one where people like me are supposed to sit down, speak softly, and never challenge the status quo. And the left, they cheered. They called it justice. They called me unhinged. Funny how no one finds their side when they scream that Trump supporters are terrorists, Nazis, threats to democracy. That doesn't get punished, it gets retweeted. But when I speak raw, unfiltered truth about what's happening at our border and in our cities, suddenly, the courtroom becomes a censorship chamber. So let me ask you this. America, what does it say about the system when telling the truth costs more than living a lie? That courtroom didn't descend into chaos because I shouted. It shattered because I said something they couldn't rebut. And when they can't beat you with facts, they try to muzzle you with fear. But here's the thing. You slap a 100,000 muzzle on someone like me. You don't silence her. You hand her a megaphone. That fine wasn't a gag order. It was gasoline. And exactly 7 minutes later, the fire hit the fuse. Because the moment they tried to crush my voice, Pam Bondi stepped in and cuffed theirs. That's right. While the media was still drafting headlines about courtroom outrage, the Department of Justice was walking into that same building with a file and walking Judge Harrow out in handcuffs. And that's what happens when the system tries to silence the wrong woman. It doesn't end with submission. It ends with an arrest, courtroom or combat zone. When law turns political. This is a courtroom, Judge Hargrove growled, slamming his gavel like it still meant something. But let's get one thing straight. This wasn't justice. This was theater, a performance dressed in robes, cloaked in ego, and trembling under the weight of one woman who refused to kneel. Karoline Leavitt didn't come to read her lines. She came to burn the script. You want respect for this court, she snapped. standing tall, eyes locked on the bench like a sniper finding her mark. I'll respect the American people, the ones you forgot, the ones your rulings crushed. The first kill shot is clean, sharp, echoing across the marble walls. What followed wasn't a trial, it was a takedown, a political ambush disguised as legal procedure, because Hargrove didn't hammer down a $100K fine out of some sacred judicial duty. He did it out of rage. Rage that a 27-year-old dared to say what millions whisper under their breath. Rage that truth walked into his courtroom without permission. You crossed a line, he warned, his voice shaking beneath the robe. No, she fired back without flinching. You drew the line around Biden's failures and called it law. I just stepped over it. Boom! Second strike. The courtroom didn't fall quiet. It crackled with tension. Reporters are scrambling for quotes. Protesters are shouting outside. Security radios are chirping in panic. And in the center of it all, Karoline didn't blink. Because she didn't come to bow to the bench, she came to flip it over. This wasn't contempt of court. This was contempt for cowardice. And the real question wasn't, did she disrespect the court? The real question was, when did speaking the truth become a crime? Since when did the Constitution stop at the judge's ego? When judges find truth, when rulings become muzzles, that's not justice, it is tyranny in a robe. And Karoline, she lit the fuse and walked through the flames. You can punish my words, she said, raising her phone, live stream blazing to millions. But you can't erase what the people already know. Boom, third strike. This wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was a battleground. And in that moment, America didn't see a gavel. They saw fear disguised as law and a young woman daring to defy it. Karoline versus the gavel. When speaking up costs a fortune, $100 for a sentence. Karoline leveled her gaze, unmoved. Then I'll make every word worth $1,000. Boom, kill shot number 3, and the gavel never stood a chance. Let's be honest, this wasn't about courtroom decorum. It was about control. Hargrove wasn't defending the law. He was defending a dying narrative. You're in contempt, he barked. Red-faced, trembling. But America was already watching, and Karoline knew it. So she turned to the camera and dropped it like thunder. They didn't find me for breaking the rules. They fined me for breaking the silence. The stream popped past 200,000 viewers, comments flying like shrapnel. She's our voice. This judge is Biden's bouncer. $100K. Cheap for the truth. And right then, Karoline delivered the blow that changed the game. This isn't a courtroom anymore. This is the price tag of free speech. They want us to be quiet. Let them bankrupt me. But I won't be bought, and I won't be muzzled. Boom! Kill shot 4. Meanwhile, Hargrove's hand gripped that gavel like a drowning man grabs driftwood. But the tide was rising. The fine wasn't a punishment. It was a badge, a receipt, a spark. She held up that paper like a trophy, smiled at her audience, and said, "This cost me $100,000. What has Biden's silence cost you?" The room shook. The stream exploded past 500,000. And Hargrove. He just realized this trial wasn't about punishing Karoline. It was about exposing him. Bondi's counterstrike. Justice wears heels and cuffs. You thought Karoline's $100,000 fine was the climax. That was just the prelude, because 7 minutes later, heels clicked, doors slammed, and Justice walked in wearing black and authority. Pam Bondi didn't enter with apologies, she entered with a warrant. Judge Hargrove, she announced, voice smooth as silk, sharp as steel. You've crossed the line. And today, the law crosses you. The courtroom froze. The gavel, useless. The man who fined Karoline for words was now about to be cuffed for years of corruption. Kill shot 5. Bondi wasn't there to debate. She was there to execute justice like a surgeon with a scalpel. Your record's a wrecking ball to due process, she declared, fining patriots, shielding the swamp. Today, that stops, Hargrove stammered, sweating. You can't arrest me, I'm a judge. Bondi didn't blink. Not anymore. Kill shot 6. To you.
C.
Marshals stepped forward like walls in motion. Click, click. The sound of steel around wrists. That was the sound of a narrative falling. The courtroom didn't gasp, it erupted. Reporters scrambling. Trump supporters roaring. Leftists storming out. And Karoline, she caught every second on live stream. "You find me for the truth," she said. Steady, phone raised, voice sharp. "He's getting cuffed for lies." Viewers, 700,000 and climbing. Hargrove was dragged through the same doors he tried to seal with silence. And Bondi, she stood firm. Composed, untouchable. "This isn't revenge," she said into the press mics. "It's a reckoning, and it had just begun." The arrest scene around the nation. When the judge becomes the criminal, you heard the click. The cuffs snapped. The gavel dropped. But this time, not to silence the truth, it silenced the judge who weaponized his power and lost the game. Judge John Hargrove, once the hand that fined conservatives into submission, was now the headline. The mugshot. The fall. Karoline didn't blink. Pam Bondi didn't flinch. And America didn't miss a second. 700,000 are watching live, then 800, then 1 million. And while Hargrove stuttered, yelled, begged for the gavel to save him, Bondi stood cold, her voice slicing through the air like a verdict. "You abused the bench. Now stand before the bar." Kill shot 7. He called it a conspiracy. She called it a case file. He screamed about judicial immunity. She handed him a warrant. He claimed political persecution. She read the charges, fines without cause, rulings without reason, power without restraint. Kill shot 8. Outside, protesters pounded on the courthouse glass. Inside, conservatives roared, liberals panicked. And in the eye of the storm, Karoline turned the camera on him. "This is the system," she told the nation, steady and fierce, eating its corruption finally. Then she raised the $100,000 fine like a badge of honor. "He fined me for the truth. Now he's arrested for fear." Twitter detonated. X went nuclear. Hashtags ignited. Judge down. Karoline won. Bondi brings justice. CNN scrambled. MSNBC cried foul. Fox News called it what it was, the turning point. This wasn't just a courtroom drama. This was historic exposure. The judge became the judged. The bench became a booking. And America picked a side. Loudly, unapologetically, permanently. To America's elites on trial. Patriots rise. They thought they could fine, silence, shame her, and we'd all just move along. But the second Judge Hargrove's cuffs clicked. Something else snapped too. The illusion. The illusion that elites could punish dissenters from behind black robes and marble walls without ever facing the people they crushed. That illusion shattered when Pam Bondi walked in, law in one hand, truth in the other. For too long, one America has ruled from penthouses and protected courtrooms, writing rules they'd never live under, handing down judgments they'd never accept. And the other America. We stood outside, forgotten, fined, called extreme just for demanding borders, honesty, and a voice in the nation we built. But this week, the script flipped. Karoline stood up, Bondi walked in, and Hargrove walked out in handcuffs. That wasn't an arrest, that was a reckoning. One side writes speeches for cocktail fundraisers, the other side live streams the truth from the courtroom floor. One side apologizes for American strength. The other side carries the Constitution like armor. And then came kill shot 9. Karoline leveled her gaze and said it for everyone watching. "You say you represent justice, but when justice knocked, you called it a threat. The left calls it chaos. We call it clarity. Because for once, the consequences didn't land on the people, they landed on the powerful. 2 Americas, sure, but now only one is rising. And it's not the one sipping lattes and fact-checking freedom from behind blue-check barriers. It's waking up, speaking out, and flipping the script. So buckle up, because this story, it's just getting started. Media warfare. When truth trends and lies spin. The courtroom was the battlefield, but the real war, it broke out online in pixels, headlines, and hashtags that cut deeper than any ruling. The second Pam Bondi said, "Cuff him." America didn't just watch, it ignited. Hargrove arrested. Karoline uncensored. Justice just dropped. Twitter turned into a digital street fight. Right-wing media plastered banners reading "Truth in handcuffs," this time on the judge. Meanwhile, CNN scrambled to spin, screaming, breaking. Bondi accused of weaponizing DOJ. Oh, now they care about overreach. Where were the op-eds and moral panic when Hargrove was fined $100,000 over a sentence? Where was the outrage when Biden appointed judges, silenced patriots, and leaked favors to their friends in power? Now, MSNBC anchors are suddenly clutching pearls over precedent. These were the same folks who threw confetti when courts went rogue on Trump, but now cry authoritarian because a leftist robe finally felt justice close in. Kill shot 10. Karoline didn't just go viral, she went undeniable. Her live stream blew past 1.2 million. TikTok flooded with clips captioned, "When the judge becomes the criminal, and the press secretary becomes the people's voice." Late-night comedians tried to spin it into satire, but every punchline came back as a compliment in disguise. They said Bondi was too aggressive. Good. America is done with polite surrender. They told Karoline grandstanded. Wrong. She stood unshaken, and the people didn't just applaud. They stood with her. This wasn't just trending. It was turning the page on the media's narrative monopoly, turning up the heat on a system that is too comfortable hiding behind microphones, makeup, and immunity. And now, a bigger question echoes louder than any courtroom gavel. If they're lying about this, what else are they spinning? Race, power, and the optics of justice. It didn't take long. Within hours of Judge Hargrove being cuffed, race became the new shield in the spin game. A white woman took down a black judge. That was CNN's headline. MSNBC followed with systemic optics at play. And just like that, the story wasn't about abuse of power, $100,000 gag order, or justice catching up to corruption. No, it became about identity politics again. But let's make something crystal clear. Justice doesn't wear skin color. It wears accountability. They called it racial optics. Karoline called it legal receipts. Pam Bondi didn't walk in with a skin agenda. She walked in with a warrant. Kill shot 11. You want to talk about representation? Where was the justice when a small-town conservative black judge in Texas was disbarred for defending Trump-era border policies? Where were the media headlines then? Silent. Non-existent. Where was MSNBC when liberal judges of color crushed whistleblowers and faced zero consequences? If we're going to talk optics, let's talk about the selective outrage that turns skin tone into a shield, only when it suits the narrative. Because here's what they never say out loud. When a conservative black man speaks up, they say he's not black. And when a white woman demands accountability, they call it oppression. Let's be clear. This wasn't black versus white. It was truth versus narrative. And Karoline, she didn't arrest a black judge. She exposed a corrupt one. Kill shot 12. Justice doesn't need a diversity quota. It requires a spine. This wasn't racial theater. It was institutional reckoning. You don't get a skin color pass when weaponizing the bench. You don't get covered by consequences just because you used to be on the right side of history. The left tried to pivot from facts to feelings, from receipts to spin, but the crowd didn't buy it. Neither did America. Because what they saw wasn't a race war, but a power check. And this time, the robe didn't win. The aftershock. When one arrest ignites a movement, you arrest a judge and you think the story ends. No, that's when America wakes up. Because when Pam Bondi slapped cuffs on Judge Hargrove, it wasn't just one man falling. It was the system cracking on live TV. And Karoline Leavitt, she didn't just speak into a mic, she detonated a national fuse. The same courtroom that tried to silence her became a megaphone for 1 million patriots. And the sound, deafening. Hashtags rolled in like thunder. Cuffed corruption. Truth costs $100K. Bondi boom. Karoline Unleashed. You couldn't scroll without seeing that moment, the gavel slipping from Hargrove's hand like a relic from a crumbling empire. People weren't talking about inflation or primaries from Iowa diners to Brooklyn barber shops. They were talking about the arrest, the moment the system flinched, the moment the elites got exposed. And the reaction, it split America like lightning. Conservatives called it justice long overdue. Progressives called it authoritarianism in heels. But the center, the independents, they said one thing. At least someone finally did something, because this wasn't politics as usual. This was raw, unfiltered rebellion. In Kansas, a town council passed a resolution praising Bondi's move. In Tennessee, a school district invited Karoline to speak about free speech under fire. And in Texas, a convoy of truckers rolled through Houston with signs that read, "100K for truth. We'd pay it again." CNN tried spinning it. Legal experts questioned the arrest, but no one was listening, because by the time their pundits finished their second latte, over 2 million people had viewed Karoline's live stream. This wasn't spin. This was a storm. The DOJ's inbox flooded. Capitol Hill shook, and federal judges across the country asked one question behind closed doors. Are we next? They wanted to humiliate Karoline. Instead, they handed her a torch, and she lit the match. From grassroots rallies to online firestorms, this wasn't just about a courtroom. This was about restoring faith, reclaiming justice, and ripping the mask off institutional arrogance. One arrest, one moment, one spark, and now the blaze is spreading. The closer you tried to silence me. Now they're screaming my name. They fined her. They shamed her. They told her to sit down, shut up, and respect the court. But she didn't kneel. She rose. And now, the silence they wanted has been replaced by something else, an entire nation screaming her name. Karoline Leavitt didn't just walk into a courtroom. She entered the lion's den and wore the judge's cuffs like a trophy. "You fined me 100K for a sentence," she said, fire in her eyes, the camera catching every syllable. And now, that sentence has rewritten American politics. From X to Capitol Hill, from kitchen tables to campaign war rooms, her words aren't echoes anymore. They're weapons. They tried to turn her into an example, and guess what? They succeeded, but not the kind they expected, because now millions don't see her as a spokesperson. They see her as the spark, the one who set the old order on fire. The court called her defiant. History will call her right, because when she held up that fine on live stream and said, "This isn't a punishment, it's a badge," she wasn't just speaking to the courtroom, she was talking to every silenced American. And that voice, it didn't fade. It became a chorus. They thought justice wore a robe, but that day, justice wore heels and held a live stream. Pam Bondi cuffed the corruption. Karoline crushed the narrative. And together, they didn't just flip the system, they flipped the nation. Now, every pundit scrambling for control, every network spinning panic into headlines, every insider clinging to the illusion of untouchable power, they're watching helplessly as one truth explodes across America. You tried to silence me, now they're screaming my name. This movement isn't a moment, it's a warning to every judge, politician, bureaucrat, and puppet still gripping a crumbling legacy. We're done being polite. We're done being quiet, and we're just getting started. Because this wasn't the end of Karoline Leavitt's battle, it was the start of yours. Subscribe right now, because next time they try to silence the truth, we'll ensure the whole world hears it.